Hello to all you denizens of the mother humping YouTubes. I'm Jaguar Jones and welcome to my new study. This is the first real study I've ever had. Ever since I've lived in this house, I've operated out of an unfinished room in the basement, which I affectionately call the orifice. But I finally decided to stop being such a cheapskate and spring for a little bit of money to fix up my house. And so we're going to give the wall of RAM a rest for a while and make some videos here in my new study. I'd like to apologize if we have some audio interruptions. There is a fairly severe thunderstorm going on right now. Maybe God is trying to tell me something, or more likely it's just the regular weather patterns we have this time of year. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with my buddy Frank from the Frank's Voice channel. Frank posted a video in which he posed some questions that he would like answered on the next League of Reason blog TV show. Since I know that Frank is a particularly impatient person, I thought I'd take a stab at answering some of his questions before the next show.
You know, if you're preaching atheism, okay, and you're trying to tell us that there is no God, you'd be preaching something like atheism, because you don't have a good answer to how life began without the existence of a supernatural being.
One thing that we need to establish here, Frank, when talking about biology, which all of your questions seem to be about, biology is theologically neutral. That is, biology, or any science, does not endorse any particular theological position. If a scientific tenet seems to conflict with a theological viewpoint, it's because that is where the evidence has led it. Scientists do not set out to prove that God does not exist or that one religion is more correct than the other. Science is an attempt to understand our natural world through observation, description, explanation, prediction, and in some cases control of that which is being studied, or nature. The human race can gain an enhanced understanding of nature and use that knowledge to make life longer, healthier, happier, and more enjoyable for everyone. So your assertion, by implication at least, that atheism is an inherent property or a byproduct of science indicates a gross misunderstandings of the true goals of science. If you reject the fact that science is theologically neutral, then further discussion with you is pointless. It would be as pointless as if you tried to explain to me the components and inner workings of my refrigerator when I insisted that the purpose of my refrigerator was to recarpet my house. For the time being, Frank, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and will assume that you are aware that science is theologically neutral. Your questions are scientific in nature, and the answers to those questions will be scientific and therefore, by definition, theologically neutral. If I'm incorrect here and you want to cling to this notion, then stop watching right now, because anything I say is going to be meaningless to you. Now, on to your questions.
Yeah, I've noticed that many atheists always want to talk about evolution, but they don't want us to bring up abiogenesis. Someone says they're afraid of abiogenesis. They don't understand it. They have no answers for it, so they don't want to talk about it. But, you know, if you're preaching atheism, okay, and you're trying to tell us that there is no God, you have to give us an explanation for how life originated on this planet. How did life begin? The origin of life. You have to give us a good explanation, because how can we believe that there is no God if you have no clue as to the origin of life, okay?
Well, you are right about one thing. There is no comprehensive, verifiable, testable, and universally agreed upon explanation as to how life got its start here on Earth. However, your insistence that that fact alone necessitates the invocation of the supernatural is the most blatant and transparent of logical fallacies, the false dichotomy. Even if you choose to reject the admittedly incomplete and compartmentalized explanation that modern science offers, that doesn't mean that your explanation has any more validity. This is not a football game where the team that doesn't lose wins by default. Instead, if you propose an alternative explanation, you must present positive evidence of your claim, and attacking an opposing viewpoint is not positive evidence of anything. An analogy would be that if you and I had a disagreement as to the identity of this man. You insist that this is in fact Elvis Presley, and I insist that this is Troy Aikman's love child. You could get DNA samples from Troy Aikman and, barring any interference from the Treasury Department, collect DNA samples from the person in question. Then, after having these DNA samples analyzed, you could prove that I was absolutely and demonstrably wrong. But does that necessarily make you right? Of course not. You are still wrong with respect to this man's identity. So why then does a lack of a complete explanation on the part of science prove that a cosmic Jewish zombie came to Earth and sacrificed himself to himself in order to pay a debt owed to himself so he could save the people that he created and loved more than anything else from the wrath of himself?
Question number 2. When you look at the first living organism, obviously it had to make both plants and it had to make animal lives. How did that happen? Do you have any clue as to how that happened? If you don't have a clue as to how that happened, why is it? Why isn't it happening now? Okay.
Well, Frank, organisms evolved millions of years ago by the same mechanism, reproduction with modification, just like they do now. As for not being able to observe evolution, which you also allude to later in your video, well, that's simply not true. You can check the crotch bar for an excellent article that details observed instances of speciation. It's complete with the bibliography, so you can check all the references. In that same article, please see section 5.9.1 for an example of observed speciation from a single cell to a multicellular organism, which answers your next question. Now, Frank, if you generally do want answers to these questions and you aren't just being argumentative with them, please take the time to read through this whole article. I think you'll find it very interesting, just as I did.